The next thing that you need to know in terms of triads and seventh chords is that they can be inverted, so inversions of chords. We've talked about everything as root position. So if we remember the root, third, fifth, the root has always been the lowest note when we've talked about it. When the root of the chord is also the lowest pitch being heard, it's called root position. So as an example, if I take a F major triad, F, A, C, F is the root, it's the lowest note, this would be root position triad. If, however, I take those same exact pitches, but I put them in a slightly different order, where now the F is on the top, A, C. So A is the lowest pitch. This is still called an F major triad, but it's an inversion. Inversion means something other than the root is the lowest pitch being heard. In this case, the third of the chord is the lowest pitch heard. That is called first inversion. Okay? Root position means that the root of the chord is in the bass. Another way of saying the lowest voice. First inversion means that the third of the chord is in the bass, the lowest pitch being heard. So let me make a little room here so I can indicate that. So here, root in bass. First inversion means the third of the chord is in the bass. One thing to be careful, when we start using these numbers, how we use them, we use numbers for many different things. When I talk about first inversion, I'm not talking about the first note of the chord. I'm talking about its inversion. When I say the third, I'm talking about the third of the chord. I'm not talking about the third note in the chord, but in this structure,
Third scale degree.
the third scale degree. So 1, 3, 5, root, third, fifth. So that, again, it's important to keep in mind the first note of the chord, the second note of the chord, the third note of the chord. That doesn't make this the third of the chord. It's the third note of the chord. This is the third of the chord. Easy to get confused if you are not careful. So, we talked about how if we take that and we have A at the bottom, C and then an F on the top, that would be first inversion of an F major triad. If we put the C here and we put both the F and the A above it, now the fifth of the chord is our lowest note, and that would be second inversion, the fifth in the bass. Okay? Again, we're remembering that F, A, C is root, third, fifth. Octaves do not change this. This could be bass clef, this could be spread out. They don't have to be written like this. We could say, a C, an A, and an F. So when you see a collection of pitches, and they're not stacked up neatly as a triad, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to write them down. You're going to say, I got a C, I got an A, I got an F. And then you need to figure out which one is the root of my chord. And the answer is always the one that you can stack thirds above. So C, can you go up a third from C and get one of the notes here? No. So, because C, you would expect some kind of E. If C were the root, there would be a third above it, an E. So C is not the root. A up a third is a C. Well, we do have a C, right? So if A were the root, there would be a C and an E. But we don't have the E. So we know A cannot be the root. F up a third is A, up a third is C. There we go. That's our root. This seems very easy now because I already told you what triad I was putting in inversion. But when it's a triad that you don't know which one is the root, this step-by-step process will be helpful. You find the root by finding the note where you can have the thirds above it. And that's what you determine as your root. In this example, the fifth of the chord is the lowest pitch. Therefore, this would be an example of a second inversion F major triad. Do not be confused. This is also an example of a second inversion F major triad. But look, the pitches are in different places. Doesn't matter. What we need, what determines what chord a chord is the letters in it, and the inversion is determined by what is the lowest voice. Everything that happens in between is another discussion. It does not influence the way the human ear hears it as a chord and how it is inverted. So we have root position, first inversion, second inversion. Let's do a little example here and see how you can do when you don't know the chord that I'm writing here. So think to yourself, I have 3 pitches there. Step 1 is to write out the letters. So you write F, D flat, and A flat. And then you need to determine which one of those letters is the root of the chord. And I just go one by one. If it were F, I would expect the letters F, A, and C. I don't have that. I have no C, instead I have a D. So I know it can't be an F as the root. If it were a D, I would expect D, F, A. Hey, look, I do have a D, I have an F, I have an A. Doesn't matter what the accidentals are for determining what the root is, you just need those letters. So right there I can stop, and I know that D flat is the root of my chord. With that, I've now determined I have myself a D flat major triad. I can write the lead sheet symbol above it, a capital D flat. I now look and say, well, what is my bass note? My bass note is the F. The F is what member of the chord? D flat is the root, that makes F the third, and A flat the fifth. So if the third is my lowest note, that means this is an example of a first inversion D flat major triad. If I want to continue using my lead sheet symbols, how do we indicate inversion with lead sheet symbols? This is how. We write the D flat to indicate our chord, we put a slash, and then we put the letter that is in the bass. I'll say that again. Whenever you're going to indicate inversion with lead sheet symbols, the top part above the slash is triad. This under here is not another triad. It's not a polychord. We'll talk about that in another entire lecture series. This is just what letter is in the bass. So when I put the F there, we know it is a D flat major triad with F in the bass. Will sound something like I put the D flat major triad first, and then I put the F in the bass. This is how you indicate inversion with lead sheet symbols. Let's do one more example here. See if we can make this interesting. We have another example. 3 pitches. I write them out. I have an A. I have an F sharp. Ooh, I wrote another A. Actually, no, that's not at all what I wrote. I wrote an A, I wrote a D sharp, I'm sorry. So I'm going to change this, my apologies, to an F sharp. So we have A, D sharp, and then F sharp. Is A my root? A, C, E? No. Don't have a C and E. Is D my root? D, F, A? Hey, great. Got it. So that means D sharp is the root of my chord. Now D sharp, F sharp, A, what triad is that? We should be able to know at this point that that is a D sharp diminished triad. It's not in root position, so I can't just write a D sharp with a circle to indicate that as my lead sheet symbol. I then have to say, well, what's in the bass? The answer is an A. A is the fifth of the chord, because D sharp's the root, F sharp is the third, and A is the fifth. That means it is a second inversion triad. I would indicate that lead sheet symbol-wise by just putting the slash and then the A. So D sharp diminished over A in the bass. Now, this is great. We've covered everything until we get to seventh chords. With seventh chords, there's one more possibility in terms of position, because the root could be in the bass, the third could be in the bass, the fifth could be in the bass, or the seventh. So, when we put the seventh of the chord in the bass, we now have third inversion. So there's four possibilities: root position, first inversion, second inversion, third inversion, when you deal with a seventh chord. So intellectually, we now understand that. If I were to say, think to yourselves about an E flat major minor 7. E flat major minor 7. Hopefully in your mind, the letters E flat, G, B flat, and D flat light up. If I then say, well, I would like this, I would like all these pitches, but I would like it to be an example of a third inversion chord. I now need that D flat, which is the seventh of the chord, to be the lowest note. That's what in the bass means. So instead of writing it like this, I would have to put the D flat as my lowest note. So I played it like that, it would be an example of a E flat major minor 7 in third inversion. The principles I'm explaining to you are pretty clear and not too complicated. Applying them and being able to think about all those, what those letters actually are, is where you need the speed. So all the things we talked about and making sure that you have your major scales and you can think about those major scales very quickly. So that when I say the third note, the fifth note, you can that pops into your head. And that's what we're going for. If you're not at the point where these letters of the notes are popping into your head, keep writing out your major scales. Write them out really neatly so that you start to develop a photograph of what it looks like. And practice it. Play it on the piano. Play all 15 major scales on the piano. Then play all the triads. Then if you go through that step by step, that will create a very, very strong foundation. If you were to play every major triad in every key, every minor triad, every diminished, every augmented, every major 7 chord, every major minor 7 chord, every minor 7 chord, every half diminished 7 chord, every fully diminished 7 chord, in every key, you will then have a strong foundation. This is what I did when I was learning this stuff. I would write it out, I would play it on the piano, I would play it on my saxophone, and now I close my eyes and I see staff paper with chords. It's the only thing I have a photographic memory for, because I wrote it out so many times. And it serves you very well. It's time well invested. Yes, it takes a long time. I promise you that by the time you get to the end of everything we're going to be talking about, that if you haven't done that, you'll spend even more time figuring out the stuff we talk about later, because you're just going to take forever to come up with all those answers. So it's worth investing that time now, such that down the road you can do all the more advanced stuff in a quick fashion. Our next thing is something called figured bass, also called bass position symbols. So figured bass started off as something very common in the Baroque era of music, and it was a way of writing out a bass line and putting some numbers underneath it that would then tell you what the chords should be. So as an example, let's write out a little bass line here. I'm going to write out a C, D, and I'm going to write 6/4 underneath it, E, and I'm going to write a 6 under it. That would be an example of figured bass. This bass line tells me what's in the bass, but it also tells me the chords. When you have a bass note with nothing underneath it, you assume root position triad. Say it again. You have a bass note, there's nothing underneath it. You assume root position triad. So, the figured bass, so we have our, over here, root position, in triads, in the triad category. For root position, we write nothing. We write no figured bass. For first inversion, again, taking first inversion, for a triad, we write 6. So right off the bat, then we look over here and say, oh, there's an E with a 6 under it. That means it's going to be our first inversion triad. Our second inversion triad, we write 6/4. So this D here in the bass with a 6/4 underneath it, that's a second inversion triad. So now you know the chords. This is a C major triad. I'm going to write lead sheet symbols. D in the bass, second inversion. That means it's a G major triad with D in the bass. E in the bass with a 6, that's first inversion. That means it's a C major triad with E in the bass. You now can figure out all the chords. Now, I did that very quickly. So let's back up a little bit and really explain how this works. What the figured bass numbers are telling you are intervals above the bass. Say it again. Intervals above the bass. That means there's a 6 above the bass and a 1/4 of above the bass. That's what it means. So if we take a second inversion triad, that's how the intervals get reconfigured. In a, and I'm going to write here, C major triad, root position, where we have root, 3rd, 5th. The intervals above the bass are a 3rd and a 5th. Right? So if I were to just write a C and write 5/3 underneath a C, that would be the same thing as saying root position triad. But Dr. Brellochs, you said there's nothing. Because we're going to make some assumptions. We're not going to write out everything. If we wrote it out, you could write 5/3. But we assume that. We don't want to write out more than we need. This is a shorthand. But when there's nothing underneath this C, we assume a 3rd and 5th above the bass. If I take my C major triad here, and now I have the 3rd as my lowest note, how do the intervals of the bass, above the bass, change? Well, the E to the G is a 3rd, and the E to the C is a 6th. Notice that I do not care what the difference is between the G and the C, or the interval between the G and the C. It's intervals above the bass. I always figure things off from the bass note. So E to G, E to C. Those are the intervals I'm concerned with. And they become 6/3. You always put the higher number top and then the lower number. So 6/3 is first inversion. But Dr. Brellochs, you only put a 6. Again, shorthand. We don't want to write more than we need. So we know that it means 6/3, but we don't put it. Let's go back here. Second inversion, now our 5th is in the bass. C, E. Let's examine the intervals above the bass. G to C is a fourth. G to E is a sixth. And that's where we get 6/4. There is no abbreviation. So, figured bass. These numbers in the figured bass are telling us intervals above the bass. We have shorthand of what we commonly use, and we leave out the 5/3. We leave out the 3 of first inversion, but we have that. You'll need to know and memorize. So when you see these, nothing, 6, 6/4, you instantly think root position triad, first inversion triad, second inversion triad. Now, when we deal with seventh chords, the figured bass is going to be different. So, let me erase this. And I'll erase this as well. And let's give ourselves an example. Let's have a C, E, G, B, which would be root, third, fifth, seventh. So, if I were going to ask you for the complete figured bass for a root position seventh chord, we don't write the 1 because that's already given, that's the note that you would see. But you would write all the other numbers. You'd write in 7, 5, 3, top to bottom. So 7, 5, 3. That would be the complete figured bass for a root position seventh chord. But we're going to have a shorthand. Just like we left out the 5, 3 for triads, we're going to do the same for the seventh chord. All we're going to write for a root position seventh chord is a 7. If we start inverting this, so now we go E, G, B, and put the C up higher, such that now the third of the chord is the lowest pitch. We then calculate our intervals again. E to G is a third. E to B is a fifth. A fifth. Let me write that. E to C is a sixth. So the complete figured bass, E to G, third, E to B, fifth, E to C, sixth, would be 6, 5, 3. That is a first inversion seventh chord. But we don't use that. We use shorthand. We use 6, 5. Let's keep inverting. Instead of E on our bottom, we have G, then B, then C, and E. We figure it out again. Intervals above the bass, above the lowest note. G to B is a third. G to C is a fourth. G to E is a sixth. So the complete figured bass would be 6, 4, 3. The abbreviation we use is 4, 3. 4, 3 is second inversion of a seventh chord. And finally, B is the bass, then C, E, G. We determine our intervals. B to C is a second. B to E is a fourth. B to G is a sixth. Our abbreviation is 4, 2. So I put an arrow all the way over here. Root position of a triad, nothing. Root position of a seventh chord, a 7. First inversion of a triad, 6 is our figured bass. 6, 5 for our seventh chord. Second inversion for a triad, our figured bass is 6, 4. Our seventh chord has 4, 3. Third inversion doesn't exist for a triad. We have 4, 2 for our seventh chord. What will now be asked is writing out a bass line with some figured bass underneath it. Let me give you some other examples here. So let's say we go E, then a B, and then I'll put a, let's say a D sharp here with a 6. You should be able to figure out what these chords are. Root position triad, first inversion triad. Just to give you a couple other things that make things even more complicated, as if it weren't complicated enough. You can modify bass position symbols with accidentals. So if I put a sharp here, just hanging out, all by itself, that sharp applies to the third above the bass. It means the third above the bass is raised a half step. So B, D, F sharp, because of our key signature, is no longer B, D, F sharp. It is now B, D sharp, F sharp. So when I put a sharp here, what that now means is that this is a B major triad. This is a B major triad with D sharp in the bass. This is an E minor triad. That is how you would realize the figured bass. There's other things you can do. So you can have the sharp, that applies to the third. You can take a number, like a 6, and put a slash through it. That means raise the 6 a half step. You could put a plus after it. Guess what that means? Raise it a half step. There's all these different symbols that kind of mean the same thing. You could have a plus after it. You could have a 7 with a flat after it. So when you start seeing the numbers with accidentals, it's just asking you to raise or lower those things by half steps. If you see a number underneath a figured bass line with nothing, without just an accidental, without a number, it's applying to the third. You're going to apply that to the third. All right, go forth and realize figured bass. Thank you.